A long time ago, in a small village, there lived a girl named Adaku. Adaku was beautiful. Her skin shone like fresh palm oil. Her hair was long, like the river path. Her legs were straight, like the palm tree, and her hips swayed like a calabash floating on water. Men would stop and stare whenever she walked past. Women would glance and whisper. Some would say, "Ah, this girl is too fine." Others would shake their heads and say, "But beauty without everything is nothing." They say all these not because she's poor or senseless, but because Adaku had a problem. A big one in the eyes of the villagers. She looked just like a boy from the front. Her chest was as flat as a cooking pan. Even little girls had more breasts than her. She looked at her friends, at the women in the village, at the girls younger than her. They all had something on their chests, something big. But she had nothing. When she went to the market, the young men would whisper. Some would laugh behind her back. Some girls would put their hands on their chest and say, "Adaku, even the new goat in my father's house has more than you." Then they would laugh and clap their hands. Adaku felt ashamed. So she started stuffing clothes inside her bra before going out. She would press and shape it until it looked real. Men would admire her, call her fine girl, and follow her around. But when one got close and found out the truth, he would run away like a chicken escaping a knife. They always say, it feels like having something with your fellow man in bed, nothing to grab. One day, a rich man from another village saw Adaku. He liked her big hips, her long hair, her smooth skin, but he never knew her big chest was stuffed with clothes. They are fake. Being ignorant of this, he approached her and told her, "You are the woman I have been looking for. Marry me." Adaku was happy. She thanked her gods. Finally, she would have a husband. The wedding day came. The village danced. The drums sounded. The women sang. Adaku smiled. But that night, when she took off her clothes, the man's eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Where, where is it?" he stammered, pointing at her chest. Adaku looked down, then back at him. "This is how I am," the man screamed. He grabbed his cloth, tied it around his waist, and ran out of the house like a madman. Adaku sat there. The candle burnt low. The night was quiet, and the tears fell. Her husband had run away, and this was just the beginning of her story. Adaku could not stay in the village anymore. Everywhere she turned, she saw pity in people's eyes. Some whispered, "That is the girl whose husband ran away on the wedding night." Others laughed behind her back. She had no husband, no money, no future. So, one morning, before the cock crowed, Adaku took her small bag, tied her wrapper tight, and entered a bus. The road was long. The journey was rough, but she did not care. She was going to Lagos. Lagos was big. Lagos was noisy. Lagos was fast. From the moment she stepped down from the bus, she knew this place was not like her village. Cars honked like angry goats. Traders screamed at the top of their voices. Children ran between moving cars like they had 9 lives. Adaku held her bag tightly. The crowd pushed her. The dust covered her. The noise shook her ears. "So this is Lagos," she whispered to herself. She went to stay with her uncle. He was a strict man with a face like a bitter cola. The first night he told her, "Adaku, this is Lagos. Nobody will dash you food. You must find work." The next day she woke up early and began searching. She walked from street to street knocking on doors, begging for work. "I can sweep, I can cook, I can do anything," she said. But every time she heard the same thing. "Where is your school certificate? You cannot read or write. Sorry, we cannot employ you. Adaku was tired. Adaku was hungry. She sat by the roadside, her stomach singing songs of hunger. That was when she met Chichi. Chichi was bright like the morning sun. Her clothes were fine. Her hair was neat. She had gold rings on her fingers and a big smile on her face. Sister, why are you sitting here like a lost goat? Chichi asked. Adaku sighed. I am hungry. I have no work. I have no money. Chichi laughed, a deep, rich laugh. Then she opened her bag, brought out food, and gave it to Adaku. Adaku ate fast. The food sweetened her soul. I can help you, Chichi said. Really? Adaku's eyes shone like the stars. Chichi nodded. But then she said, the work is not for small girls. Adaku frowned. What kind of work? Chichi smiled. A slow smile. Night work. Adaku did not understand, but she was hungry. She needed money. I will do it, she said. Chichi just laughed again. We shall see. And just like that, Adaku's life in Lagos began. Lagos had changed Adaku. At night, she painted her lips red, wore short dresses that hugged her body, and followed Chichi and the other girls into the bright streets where men with deep pockets waited. Some men liked her face, some liked her big hips, some liked her long legs, but many of them, after a few minutes, would shake their heads and walk away. Ah, this one is not complete, some would whisper. Fine face, fine hips, but her front is like a boy's own, others would say, laughing. Adaku heard everything. She pretended not to care, but inside her heart burned like hot charcoal. Then one night, Chief arrived. Chief was not like the other men. His stomach was big like a drum. His fingers were full of gold rings, and when he talked, everybody listened. I want that one, he said, pointing at Adaku. Chichi's eyes widened. She nudged at Adaku. Ah, this is your lucky night, my sister. Adaku followed Chief to a big hotel. The bed was soft like pap. The room smelled of rich men's perfume, and the air conditioner was colder than Harmattan breeze. The night ended. Chief sat up, looked at her, and threw a bag of money on the bed. The bag landed with a thud. Adaku's heart jumped. She had never seen that much money before. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Thank you, sir, she said, bending her knees in respect. Chief smiled, but then he said, next time I see you, make sure your chest has grown. Adaku froze. She looked down at herself. Then she looked at him. Grown? She asked, confused. Chief waved his hand. You are a fine girl, but your body is not complete. Use that money and do the right thing. Then he stood up, put on his agbada, and left. Adaku ran back home, the money clutched in her hands. Chichi, what does he mean? She asked. Chichi laughed. He wants you to do surgery, my sister. He wants you to add something to your front. Adaku's eyes widened. She had never thought about that before. She had dreamed of it, yes. She had wished for it. But to actually do it? She sat on the bed, staring at the money. What if I do it? She whispered to herself. What if I become beautiful everywhere? The thought excited her. The thought scared her. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she would visit the hospital. Early in the morning, before the sun had fully stretched its arms, Adaku and Chichi entered the hospital. The air smelled of medicine. Nurses walked up and down, their shoes clicking on the cold floor. The doctor was an old man with glasses that sat low on his nose. He looked at Adaku and asked, Are you sure about this? Yes, doctor, Adaku said, gripping her bag tightly. The doctor leaned forward. There could be problems later, complications. Adaku waved her hand. Doctor, I don't care. I want to be like the other girls. The doctor sighed and nodded. All right, we will begin tomorrow. The next day, Adaku lay on the hospital bed. Bright lights shone above her. Cold metal touched her skin. The last thing she heard was the doctor saying, "Count down from 10, 10, 9, 8." Darkness. When Adaku woke up, the first thing she felt was pain. Her chest burned like hot pepper soup. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through her body. "Ah!" she cried. Chichi rushed to her side. "Adaku, relax, let me see." Slowly, Adaku turned to the mirror, and then she saw it. Her chest was full. Her body was perfect. She looked complete. Adaku smiled. For the first time in her life, she felt like a woman. "Chichi, look at me," she whispered, touching herself. Chichi laughed. "My sister, you have arrived." 2 days later, Adaku stepped out for the first time. The night lights of Lagos sparkled. The air was full of voices, music, and the smell of roasted suya. Adaku walked slowly, her heels clicking on the ground. And then she noticed it. Eyes were on her. Men stopped talking when she passed. Some turned their heads and stared. Some whispered. Some followed. They offered her more money than before. Adaku smiled. She was no longer just Adaku. She was now Adaku, the queen of the night. But 2 weeks later, something strange started happening. Adaku woke up one morning and tried to put on her bra. It didn't fit. She frowned. Did I buy the wrong size? She asked herself. She tried another one. It didn't fit either. She turned to the mirror. Her eyes widened. Her chest was bigger than before. At first, she smiled. Maybe it's just part of the healing, she thought. But she didn't know. She didn't know that her real problem was only beginning. At first, Adaku was happy. She stood in front of the mirror, turning from side to side, admiring herself. Her chest looked fuller, rounder, perfect. Maybe it's the medicine working, she told herself, smiling. Her clothes hugged her body better. Men stared even longer. The money doubled. Chichi clapped her hands and laughed. Ah, Adaku, you are now the queen of the night. Adaku felt on top of the world. But 3 days later, the happiness started turning to fear. One evening, Adaku reached for her bra. She pulled it, stretched it, twisted it. It didn't fit. She frowned. This is strange. She tried another one. Too tight. Maybe I need a bigger size, she thought. But every morning, when she woke up, her chest looked bigger than the day before. She could no longer wear her old clothes. Everything felt tight. Even walking felt different. Then came the pain. At first it was small, just a sharp pinch here and there. But with each passing day, it grew. It felt like fire burning inside her chest. At night, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned. Sweat rolled down her body. Chichi, something is wrong, she cried one night. Chichi sat up, rubbing her eyes. Ah, don't worry. It's part of the healing. The pain will stop soon. Adaku nodded. She wanted to believe her friend. But the pain did not stop. It got worse. One afternoon, Adaku couldn't take it anymore. She ran back to the hospital, her wrapper barely tied, her feet dragging on the ground. "Doctor, help me!" she cried, falling to her knees. The doctor frowned. He examined her. His face changed. He called another doctor. They whispered. They checked again. Then he shook his head. "We can't help you," he said, stepping back. "There is no cure for this problem." Adaku froze. What? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Your body is reacting to the surgery. The implants are growing abnormally. We have never seen this before." Adaku grabbed his shirt. Doctor, please, do something. The doctor sighed. We are sorry. There is nothing we can do. Adaku cried. She ran to another hospital. No help. Another one. No help. Doctors shook their heads. Some whispered behind her back. Some looked at her with pity. Her friends watched as her body changed every day. Some stopped coming close. Some whispered behind her back, just like in the village. Chichi held her hand and said, "Don't worry, the pain will stop." But the pain did not stop. It only got worse. One afternoon, the sun was hot. The room was quiet. Adaku lay on her bed, sweating like a pot of hot soup. The pain had swallowed her. Her body shook. Her skin was cold, but inside, she felt like fire was burning her bones. Her chest was too heavy. She could barely move. She could barely breathe. God, is this how I will die? She whispered, tears rolling down her face. Then she heard a voice outside. Free medical checkup across the road. Come one, come all. Adaku's eyes opened. Her hands trembled. Maybe they can help me, she thought. With all the strength left in her body, she dragged herself up. She wrapped her scarf around her chest, put on a loose gown, and staggered out of the house. The small clinic was crowded. Women held their babies. Old men coughed. A nurse called names. When Adaku entered, the doctor looked at her. His face changed. Madam, what is wrong? He asked. Adaku removed her scarf and pointed at her chest. Pain, she whispered. The doctor examined her. His hands moved up and down, pressing, checking. His forehead creased. Another doctor came. Then another. They whispered. They checked again. Then the first doctor stepped back and said, There was a mistake in your surgery. If we don't treat you, you will die. Adaku's eyes widened. Die? She whispered. The doctor nodded. Your body is rejecting what they put inside you. We need to take you to the hospital now. Adaku felt dizzy. The world spun around her. Doctor, please help me, she begged. The nurses rushed her to the hospital. They laid her on a bed. They brought scissors, bandages, gloves. The doctor took a deep breath. We need to remove the bandages, he said. One of the nurses pulled the bandage. Then it happened. Maggots. White, wriggling, living maggots, crawling out of her skin. The doctors jumped back. The nurses screamed. Adaku saw them. Adaku felt them. And Adaku screamed too. The hospital room was filled with screams. The nurses covered their noses and ran out. The doctors stepped back, eyes wide with horror. Chichi, who had followed Adaku to the hospital, gasped. She clutched her chest, took one step forward, then stopped. The smell. It was too terrible. It filled the room like rotten meat left under the sun for weeks. It choked the air. It turned stomachs. Adaku looked down and saw them. Help me, she cried, reaching out. But nobody moved. Even Chichi, her best friend, shook her head and stepped back. Chichi, please, Adaku begged. Chichi covered her mouth. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her legs would not move forward. Adaku cried. She tried to stand up, but her chest was too heavy. It had grown so big that it could no longer fit the hospital bed. She could feel it stretching her skin. She gasped for air. Doctor, do something, she screamed. The doctors whispered among themselves. One of them wiped his forehead. Another shook his head. Then one of them turned to Adaku and said, We must cut off both breasts. That is the only way to save you. Adaku froze. Cut off, she whispered. The doctor nodded. If we don't, you will die. Adaku's lips trembled. She shook her head. No, I can't. But then the pain hit her again. A deep, burning, tearing pain. She clutched her chest. She screamed, "Cut it!" She shouted, "Cut it off! Just save me!" The doctors moved fast. They rolled her into the theater. Bright light shone above her. The air smelled of medicine and death. She saw the knives. Her heart pounded. Then she heard the doctor say, "Count down from 10. 10, 9, 8. Darkness. The last thing she felt was the cold touch of the knife on her skin. The world was quiet. The lights above her were dim. The room smelled of medicine and loneliness. Adaku opened her eyes. She tried to move, but her body felt light, too light. Then she looked down. Her chest was empty. There was nothing left. Tears filled her eyes. She touched the bandages, felt the flatness where her body once had shape. Her fingers trembled. "It's all gone," she whispered. She turned her head, searching for a familiar face. Chichi, her friends, the nurses, nobody was there. Even the hospital staff avoided her. She was alone. Days passed. Adaku sat on the hospital bed, staring at the wall. She remembered everything. She remembered how she hated her body, how she cried when men laughed at her, how she desperately wanted to be like the other girls. She remembered Chief's words, "Next time I see you, make sure your chest has grown." She had done it all for them, for men who saw her as nothing. Now she had nothing left. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she wished she could go back to the village, back to the girl who stuffs cloths into her bra, back to the girl who still had something left to lose. One evening, the doctor came. He pulled up a chair, sat beside her, and asked, "Why did you do this to yourself?" Adaku looked at him. She wanted to lie. She wanted to say it was a mistake, but tears betrayed her. "Because men mocked me," she said, her voice shaking. "Because nobody wanted me. Because I had no work." The doctor listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he took a deep breath and said, "You don't need a man to value you." Adaku stared at him. "If you want to work, I can give you a job here," he continued. "You will start small, cleaning, helping patients, but it will be honest work." Adaku's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. She had learned her lesson. She had lost too much, but this time she was ready to live with what she had. And so, Adaku picked up the broken pieces of her life and started again. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.